I want to give a brief overview of the implications of the roadmap out of lockdown for churches, particularly in England. I'll mention Scotland and Wales as well. So obviously the government has announced the way that it's going to lead us out from the current situation of lockdown. The big message that comes from everything government's saying is this is going to be a very cautious and slow process. It's not going to be before the end of June, before things are back to anything like what we might describe as normal. And there'll be a series of small incremental steps along the way. So the process of a return to normality is going to be long and slow. And as church leaders, it helps us to understand that and to lead our people through that. I also think that everything that government has said and the way that things have been laid down, however frustrated we might be with the pace they're suggesting, I think it is highly unlikely that the pace is going to be faster than is indicated. If anything, government has made clear that all of the steps depend upon the virus continuing to reduce and being kept under a degree of control. Therefore, there's much more likelihood that it will take longer time rather than it will take less time. So I think the prospects of lobbying the government to do things more quickly at this stage, given the plan they've produced, are unlikely to have any great effect. So I think we're probably going to have to live with what the government has set out. Let me try to highlight what are the big implications for churches. What are the implications in England? Firstly, I think a key thing to note is social distancing and singing. There aren't proposals to change, certainly in the immediate sort of position, the current rules in relation or rules and guidance in relation to social distancing and singing. So there's no indication anywhere that the current guidance against corporate singing in church is going to be changed. There's no change in the social distancing requirements when people meet together, 2 meters or 1 meter plus if you've got other mitigations. The earliest possible date for ending social distancing is probably the 21st of June. There's no guarantee that all elements will be removed at that point. It may well be that some social distancing continues to be in the guidance. There's no guarantee that at that point there will be a removal of things like, say, mask wearing inside. But basically, for the whole of this period, we're going to probably have to be living with mask wearing in churches, social distancing requirements, and probably sort of the continued guidance on corporate singing. We'll make the points to government. I've got a call with the Minister of Faith next week, but my expectation is that that is the way that things will be until sort of towards the end of June. What are the implications for our indoor corporate worship, our gathered services? Well, of course, at the moment, churches in England are open. We can gather for corporate worship, but the limitations are that you're not able to mix and mingle at church. So you can't mix and mingle outside of your own household group with any others. There will be a gradual relaxing of the rules of social contact, which will make it possible for people at church to be able to mix and mingle with one another. So if everything goes according to plan, from the 17th of May, you'll be able to have mixing and mingling between groups of 6. So it'll be back to the rule of 6 inside church, or 2 households. Of course, 2 households with children might be more than 6 people in total, but you'll be able to mix or mingle, come to church in a group of 6 people or 2 households. So there'll be a limited ability to be able to mix more than we can at the moment. And then from the 21st of June, there should be no legal restrictions on social mixing in the church context. But essentially, we're not going to be able to be mixing and mingling with one another indoors before the 17th of May. What about outside corporate worship? What about if you're gathering to meet outdoors? Well, at present, you are permitted to meet outdoors if you have a church car park, courtyard, or garden. That's treated as being the place of worship. You might have picked up on the story of the church that was fined £10,000 in Nottingham this week for trying to meet in a pub car park. You can't just meet outside anywhere. It happens to be only because these areas are treated as, by law, as part of the place of worship. And again, if you do meet in those places, you can't mix or mingle at the moment. From the 29th of March, because it's outside, if you are meeting in your car park, courtyard, or garden, you'll be able to mix or mingle, again, in groups of 6 or 2 households. So you'll be able to do a bit more mixing if you're able to meet outside. From the 17th of May, you'll be able to meet outside in a group of 30 anywhere. So you could, from the 17th of May, potentially have outdoor worship gatherings for up to 30 people. And then again, from the 21st of June, there should be no legal restrictions on social mixing. So it's slightly different for outdoor worship. For weddings, obviously, it's a big concern that weddings haven't been able to take place. At the moment, you can only have weddings in exceptional circumstances. That's generally where one of the parties is terminally ill, with a maximum of 6 attenders at the wedding. That continues for the moment, but from the 29th of March, weddings will be permitted to be able to take place in church, and it won't be limited to exceptional circumstances, though it will still only be with a maximum of 6 attenders and no receptions. From the 12th of April, the weddings and receptions will be able to take place with a maximum of 15 people, which will then be extended on the 17th of May to weddings and receptions with 30 attenders. And then from the 21st of June, if all goes according to the plan, there'll be no legal restrictions on social gatherings, and therefore you'll be able to have weddings and receptions with unlimited numbers. So a slow unfolding of the number of people who are able to attend. It's similar with funerals. So in relation to funerals in England at the moment, you can have a funeral with 30 attenders and then a wake in a venue for a maximum of 6. Again, these numbers slightly increase so that from the 29th of March, sorry, I think I put the 12th of March there by mistake. That should be the 29th of March. That's just a typing error. It will be 30 attenders and up to 15 at a wake. From the 17th of May, it will be 30 attenders and 30 at a wake. And then again, from the 21st, no legal limits on social gatherings. What can we do in the way of pastoral care and small groups in churches? That's obviously been a key question. How do we care for people? What are we able legally to do when we are in kind of pastoral care and small groups? There are things we can do at the moment. So you can run support groups for a maximum of 15 people. It's possible to visit people in their homes, to provide care and assistance to the vulnerable, to visit the dying, to provide emergency care and prevent people suffering harm or injury. And you can exercise outside with one person. So exercising, not stopping and chatting. But many churches and leaders are making maximum use of those current opportunities. The rules on sort of social distancing and gathering will enable gradually more things to happen over the coming months. So from the 8th of March, you are permitted to meet a person outside socially. In other words, you don't have to be exercising. You can sit down for a coffee. You can have a picnic together. More significantly, from the 29th of March, you're able to meet with 6 people from other households or from 2 other households, which means bigger families can get together. So 6 people or 2 households, you can meet outside. Important element here is you can therefore meet in private gardens. That's going to open up lots of opportunities for pastoral ministry, small groups, small prayer meetings, meeting in an outside context. Again, from the 17th of May, we've already noted this, you can meet up to 30 people outside. So a much bigger group will be able to meet outside. And then also from the 17th of May, you'll be able to have the meeting of smaller groups indoors. So that'll obviously be a key step. So from the 17th of May, 6 people or 2 households will be able to meet indoors once again, opening possibilities for both pastoral meetings, small groups, prayer meetings. And again, if all goes according to plan, from the 21st of June, there should be no legal restrictions on gatherings. Children and youth ministry are obviously a key area at the moment. At the moment, children and youth ministry isn't really possible unless it falls under the category of a support group, or there's some provision for groups for the care of the children of key workers. But basically, most work with children and youth is not able at the moment. Schools are going back on the 8th of March, but we shouldn't think that suddenly means that all kinds of sort of children's activities are possible, Sunday school and other gatherings. Obviously, schools are going to be under pretty restrictive rules about the numbers of tests that they need to conduct. Secondary school children will have to wear face masks in the class. So the 8th of March doesn't open up suddenly opportunities for churches to be running ordinary children and youth activities. There will be some provision from the 8th of March to allow education and training in out-of-school settings. The guidance hasn't yet been published yet, so I don't know exactly what that's going to mean, but it seems that it's going to be for very limited group sizes. So something will be allowed, but we're not quite sure what yet. From the 29th of March, you'll be able to have organised sport for both adults and children outside, so that might provide some opportunity in organised sport activities. And again, from the 29th of March, you'll effectively be able to run outdoor parent and child groups with a maximum attendance of 15 parents and their children. So again, things like mums and toddlers kind of groups, but only, I'm afraid, in March outdoors. The key date for indoor activities is the 12th of April. And at that point, all indoor children's activities will be permitted. So that will enable us to do youth groups, Sunday schools, those kinds of things, and parent and toddler groups with up to 15 parents. Again, no doubt there'll be added guidance around that that is published. And then, as with everything else, from the 21st of June, there should be no legal restrictions on social gatherings. So I hope you can see from that it's just a process of slow relaxing of the requirements, being able to permit more gathering, more mingling in small groups, outdoors first, then indoors. And those things will allow churches to resume, if this timetable is kept, various of their ministries before we reach the 21st of June, where there are no limitations on gatherings and what you can do, but there may still be some social distancing and, for example, mask wearing requirements in some contexts. Very briefly for Scotland, just to keep in mind what's happening in Scotland. Scotland, the situation is different because at present places in Scotland are closed by law. You can't meet to worship in church. There's a judicial review going on at the moment. But the government has indicated that places will be able to open for communal worship in early April, probably April the 5th. In Scotland at the moment, you can currently have a wedding, even in a place of worship, for a maximum of 5 people, and a funeral for 20 people. And then Scotland will revert to its levels system at the end of April. So there'll be different restrictions depending on the area. And then finally, just to note in Wales, very different in Wales for churches. Churches are open for public worship. There's no limit on numbers, but that's kind of controlled by how many people you can fit in. You've got a legal duty to make every effort to maintain 2-meter social distancing. And then weddings and funerals, again, can take place now. But again, the total numbers are limited by social distancing in the building. I hope that gives you an overview of where we're going and what the major implications are for churches. We'll make that sheet available sort of on the website so you can get it. I also wrote a blog basically highlighting those very things yesterday that's available on my blog site. I think those are the horizons around which we ought to be planning and thinking for our kind of ministries in our local churches. I hope that's helpful. It's a bit difficult to put it all together when you just read it, but I think that teases out the issues for churches. Government doesn't mention church at all. It hasn't really given any clarity about churches. You've got to draw that from everything else that they've said. Their priorities are really education and then getting the economy open. Thank you for bearing with yet another lot of guidance to get your heads around.
One that's a repeat question, which is worth starting with, I think, John. Are pastors eligible in the priority group for vaccinations? So 3 or 4 people have asked this. Are they classed as social care workers? There's some thought that they might be. If so, would you recommend pastors take it or not take it? What's the kind of the thinking on that? What would you say, John?
I don't know the answer to the question of whether they're entitled or not, so I'm sorry I can't give you a definitive answer on that. We'll look into that. I haven't personally heard anything that says that they are, but that doesn't mean that it isn't necessarily the case. Obviously, I think anybody in any group who is offered a vaccine, because they're seen as being in those groups, has the right to be able to take up that vaccine. That's the mechanism by which government is trying to protect as many people as possible. And it's certainly true that pastors, as they engage with people, may well be having more contact with people than others, but I don't definitively know the answer to that question.
And as a follow-up to that, somebody's asked, if pastors are eligible, if they're members of the Pastors Network, can we provide that accreditation? I would say the answer to that is probably, because you are. So that's okay. So there we are. A couple of questions, if I may, about the lockdown and how it relates to youth and children's activities, just to follow up from what you presented to us earlier in our gathering. John, one of the legitimate reasons for leaving home at the moment is to attend an act of worship. Does that mean a church could legitimately put on a children's service as an act of worship, perhaps in a separate room, a church for children socially distanced to attend?
Yeah, I mean, certainly all age family services and children's services have been legitimate within the scope of what's allowed in a place of worship already. I think we've already given that guidance, that that falls within the scope of worship. The point is that running separate Sunday schools and creche and things like that, they're not really in the form of a worship service. So there's a difference between a genuine service for children or families and what you might call additional activities, which aren't really in the nature of a service.
And just finally, John, you mentioned on your blog information you received from the Minister for Faith that said out of school educational activities can start from the 8th of March for limited numbers of children. Surely that would certainly include some form of Sunday school, wouldn't it, if that's the case?
I think that remains to be seen as to how they advise. So I think it depends what precisely is included. It's clear that they're going to limit the numbers of people who can attend that. Whether or not it also then requires all of the kinds of testing requirements and restrictions that schools will face. So I wouldn't hold your breath that that's going to enable us to run the kind of Sunday school groups that we are used to running or wanting to run. To some extent, that is the only reference to that I've seen in any of the government material. So that doesn't appear in the overall roadmap. That is only a comment from the Minister of Faith, which is why I'm slightly reticent, because I've got no idea what the substantive content of that will be. But we will, of course, let you know as soon as we have any further information as to exactly what that will mean. But I would honestly say don't plan Sunday schools from the 8th of March as if it's all going to be all right, because the Minister of Faith has made that comment.
John, that's great. Just before we finish, a couple of folk been in touch with me on the chat. It seems that pastors, ministers are indeed on the government list of social care professionals for a vaccine, and there's even a link on the NHS website to book a vaccination in if you're in that category. So you can look to do that. And somebody else telling me that payslip was proof enough to get a vaccine. So we'll add that to the website. We'll look into that, but I just thought it was worth sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just one final comment, just as we think about this lockdown, I think it's worth bearing in mind as we lead our churches that even though government may be allowing us to do certain things at certain stages, we must bear in mind, and I think this has been experienced all along, that many people in our congregations may not feel safe to do those things, even when government says that you're allowed to do them. So, and there'll continue to be guidance rather than perhaps law about social distancing. So as we lead our churches, let's not start with the assumption that everybody will be perfectly happy to do everything at every point at which the government allows that to happen. We're going to have to be wise about how we lead our churches through this time.